The 22nd of June, 1941. Hitler's armies stormed into the Soviet Union, and within months, Stalin's Red Army was starving, freezing, and on the brink of collapse. Then, American ships began arriving with trucks, boots, and endless crates of food that changed the war's outcome. But did Stalin himself secretly admit the Soviets would have lost without America's unmatched weapon supply? In the winter of 1942, the Soviet Union felt like a country holding on by its last thread. Snow buried the villages and roads, yet food was so short that even black bread was cut into tiny slices and spread thin among whole families. Mothers stood in lines that stretched for hours, clutching little ration cards as if they were gold, while soldiers at the front went hungry on thin soup and bits of cabbage. Factories in Moscow and Stalingrad worked day and night, but the machines were old, parts were missing, and workers often fainted from lack of food. The land itself was torn apart. Bombs had flattened whole blocks of homes, bridges were broken, and trains limped along the rails, late and overloaded. Even the law seemed to breathe fear. Secret police watched every word, and no man dared say the Red Army was weak. To complain was to vanish. Yet inside this world of struggle there was still pride. Soviet officers wore their medals with stiff backs, even if their boots leaked snow melt through the seams. Young soldiers sang songs about the motherland while carrying rifles that sometimes had to be shared between two men. The people were told again and again that their strength alone would crush the German invader. Radio voices praised the workers, the farmers, the soldiers, and above all, Stalin. But behind the loud words, hunger and cold whispered louder. The front line showed the truth. A rifleman in his foxhole clutched a gun so old its bolts stuck when frost hit. His coat was patched with scraps of cloth from another uniform, his gloves only half whole. He dreamed of warm bread or meat, but instead he chewed frozen beets. Along the road behind him limped trucks that belched smoke and broke down often. Horses pulled sleds with supplies, yet even the horses looked like skeletons. The Red Army was proud but worn thin, and the soldiers knew it, even if they never dared say it out loud. Rumors began to drift in like the cold wind. Dock workers at Murmansk told of ships that came from far across the sea. Ships heavy with crates marked with strange letters, USA. Some said these crates held food unlike anything seen in years. Others claimed they carried boots that would not fall apart in snow, or trucks that ran strong even in deep mud. At first, no one believed it. They thought it was just another tale, a trick to lift tired hearts. America was spoken of as a land of greedy capitalists, not as a friend. Why would such a country help the Soviet Union? But when the first soldiers saw one of those crates cracked open, a tin of meat shining inside, the whispers grew louder. Could it be true that far away, across the ocean, there was a nation that had more food and machines than it knew what to do with? If so, what else might arrive? What else might change? The question hung in the bitter air, heavy as smoke, and no one yet dared to answer. The first time the soldiers saw the supplies arrive, it felt like stepping into a different world. Trucks rolled into the depot with paint so fresh it still shined under the gray sky. On the sides of the crates, big black letters spelled USA, and when the lids were pried open, the smell of rich food rose into the cold air. Inside were cans of meat, packed in neat rows, butter sealed tight in tins, and even blocks of chocolate wrapped in silver paper. A soldier, who had not tasted real sugar in months, held a piece of candy in his palm, staring at it as if it were a jewel. He bit into it slowly, and the sweetness spread across his tongue in a way that made his eyes water. The contrast grew sharper with each new arrival. Soviet bread was dark, heavy, and cut into small slices that barely filled the stomach. Now, in the warehouses, stood crates filled with white flour, smooth and fine as snow. Soldiers who had grown used to watery cabbage soup now watched American cooks stir pots that smelled of beef and beans. On one cold morning, men lined up and were handed little cups of something fizzy and brown from bottles marked Coca-Cola. The drink stung their tongues with bubbles, but then it left a sweet taste that none of them had ever known before. They laughed, wiping their mouths with their sleeves, half amazed, half shy at enjoying something so strange. Then came the machines. The Studebaker trucks rolled forward, their engines strong, their wheels biting into the mud where old Soviet trucks would have sunk. Men climbed onto the flatbeds, marveling at how the planks were smooth and unbroken. A driver turned the key, and the engine purred instead of coughing smoke. The soldiers watched as the truck hauled a full load of shells across a field of slush without stopping once. Some of them clapped their hands, shaking their heads in disbelief. The clothing, too, spoke its own truth. American boots were sturdy, with thick soles that kept out the cold, unlike the patched felt boots that soaked through with ice water. Wool socks came in neat bundles, smelling faintly of oil and cotton. One soldier pulled on a new pair of gloves and whispered that his hands had not felt this warm since before the war began. Around them, Soviet uniforms looked worn and thin, patched again and again until they were more thread than cloth. Every sight, every taste, every sound drove the same thought deeper into their minds. America was not weak, as they had been told. America was rich, powerful, and overflowing with supplies that seemed endless. The more they saw, the more uneasy they grew, for this was not what they had been taught. If these ships kept coming, if these trucks and crates never stopped, then maybe it was true that without this help, the Red Army would have already been broken. The thought lingered like a shadow they could not shake, whispering of changes yet to come. One evening in early spring, when the ice was melting into gray rivers along the roads, a Soviet officer sat at a small desk with a single candle burning low. Before him lay a can of peaches that had come from one of the American crates. He opened it with his knife, and the sweet smell filled the room, brighter than the smoke of the candle. He lifted one slice on his fork, golden and dripping syrup, and placed it in his mouth. The taste burst across his tongue, rich and soft, so different from the bitter cabbage and hard bread he had known. For a moment he closed his eyes, and he thought, "This is what the sun must taste like." Later in his notebook he wrote a single line, "It feels like eating light itself." In the days that followed, more moments like this came. A young soldier rode in the back of a Studebaker truck as it pulled heavy guns through mud that reached the knees of men on foot. He had seen old Soviet trucks stall and sink, forcing soldiers to push until they froze their hands in icy water. But now the American truck kept moving, steady and strong, and he held the rail tight as the ground shook beneath him. He whispered to the man beside him, "Without this, we would still be stuck." His words were quiet, but they carried a weight he could not deny. The Red Army had always been told it stood alone, that its power was born only from its people and its leader. Yet here, in their hands and under their boots, were gifts that told another story. Wool socks that kept out the cold, radios that carried clear voices across miles of snow, tins of meat that kept hunger away. Each one spoke of a country across the ocean that seemed to have no end to its strength. The soldiers felt it even if they did not say it out loud. The old songs of pride now sounded thin when compared with the rumble of the new engines. The officer who had tasted peaches began to notice his own thoughts changing. He no longer believed the words of the radio as he once had. How could it be true that America was weak when every week ships brought more proof of its wealth? He did not dare say it in public, but in the silence of his tent he wrote, "Without this help, we could not stand." The words frightened him, for he knew they went against everything he had been taught. Even Stalin himself, in the dark halls of the Kremlin, was said to have admitted the truth to those closest to him. The Red Army had fought with courage, but courage alone could not have carried them this far. It was the endless flow of food, trucks, boots, and guns from across the ocean that kept the front alive. And in that admission lay a shift that no one could take back, a quiet knowledge that changed how the soldiers looked at the world and at themselves. The war ended not with a single cheer, but with a long, tired sigh across the land. Soviet soldiers, worn thin from years of blood and hunger, finally began the slow journey back home. Trains rattled eastward, carrying men in faded uniforms, and women who had worked the front lines, all pressed shoulder to shoulder, all silent as they looked out at the ruined countryside. Towns were blackened shells. Villages had roofs patched with straw and walls leaning like old men. The smell of smoke still clung to the air, though months had passed since the last battles. Yet in the pockets of these weary travelers lay small tokens, reminders of another world they had seen. A pair of warm socks with "Made in USA" stitched faintly on the edge. A stub of chocolate wrapped in silver. A photograph of a Studebaker truck, its bed piled high with shells that once rolled straight to the front. When they stepped off the trains and walked into their villages, families rushed forward with tears, touching their faces, hugging them tight, counting the missing teeth and the scars. The joy was sharp, but so was the sting of absence, for many did not return. The homes were emptier than before, and food was still scarce. Mothers cooked thin porridge from barley and potatoes, and children clutched tin bowls, waiting their turn. Yet the soldiers who had eaten Spam, who had tasted canned peaches, could not forget the difference. When they lifted spoons of watery soup to their lips, the memory of rich meat rose unbidden. They chewed bread so coarse it cut the mouth, and they remembered white flour as soft as snow. They tried to stay silent, but around the tables whispers slipped out. If only you had seen the crates, if only you had tasted the peaches. But they had to be careful. The state had its eyes everywhere, and it was forbidden to give credit to anyone outside the motherland. Speeches on the radio and banners hung across cities told the same story. Victory was only Soviet, born from the strength of workers and the genius of Stalin. Still, in the privacy of their homes, when the shutters were closed and the lamps burned low, the stories came out in quiet voices. One man told his son of the boots that did not fall apart in the snow. Another told his daughter of a fizzy drink that tickled his tongue and made him laugh. Though death had been all around him, the children's eyes grew wide. These things sounded like fairy tales, like food and drink made for kings, yet their fathers swore it was true. The contrast hit hardest when these men tried to live again in the world they had left. A farmer went back to his field with tools that bent and broke, and he thought of the sturdy American machines that had pulled through mud without stopping. A driver climbed into an old Soviet truck, coughing and spitting smoke, and remembered how the Studebaker had purred steady like a living beast. A young officer wore his patched uniform to a ceremony and felt the cloth scratch against his skin, while in his mind he recalled the smooth gloves that had warmed his hands in the frozen nights. Everywhere he looked, he saw the gap between what his land gave him and what he had once been handed from across the ocean. Yet he also felt a strange shame. For though he knew the truth, he could never speak it. To admit out loud that their survival had rested on American food and machines would mean danger. Men had vanished for less. So he carried it inside, a secret that burned but also gave him strength. He looked at his children, thin but alive, and thought, "We lived because of those crates. You are here because of them." He never wrote it down. Never spoke it beyond a whisper, but the knowledge stayed. Years passed, and the war became a story told in classrooms and parades. The state polished its version, erasing the parts it did not like, painting the Red Army as a wall of iron that had needed nothing but itself. But under that paint lay cracks. Families remembered the tales of chocolate, of trucks, of boots that never wore out. Children who had listened wide-eyed grew into adults with quiet doubts, questions that did not match the lessons on the radio. They wondered how a country painted as greedy and weak could have given so much. They wondered if maybe strength was not only about armies and medals, but also about fields that grew more food than could be eaten, about factories that made more machines than could be counted. One old soldier, now gray-haired, walked through his village one autumn morning. The leaves had turned gold and red, and smoke rose from chimneys where families cooked small meals. He leaned on his stick and watched the children run down the path, their shoes worn, their clothes thin. He remembered the boots that had carried him through snow, the trucks that had pulled him out of mud, the peaches that had tasted like sunlight. A neighbor greeted him and asked if the stories of those strange supplies were true. The old man smiled a tired smile and said softly, "Without them, I would not be standing here." His words hung in the air like a truth too heavy to deny, though still too dangerous to shout. What the men had carried home was more than socks, or tins, or gloves. It was the memory of a different way of life, one filled with abundance that seemed endless. They had seen a glimpse of power, not built on fear, but on plenty. And though they could not speak of it openly, it changed the way they measured the world. For them, victory was no longer only about battles won. It was also about who could feed their people, who could clothe them, who could move armies across oceans and still have more to spare. The legacy of that knowledge lived quietly, passed in whispers, and in the way a man paused before repeating the words of a speech. It lived in the eyes of children who asked, "What was it like?" And in the hearts of fathers who answered with tales of sweet drinks and strong trucks. And it lived in the final reflection of those who had fought and returned, that the war was not won by pride alone. It was won by the endless stream of supplies that crossed the sea, the unmatched power of a country that had given more than anyone thought possible. One soldier, near the end of his life, wrote a final note in his journal, the words shaky but clear. "They told us we won by ourselves, but I know better. We stood because America fed us, clothed us, and carried us through the storm. Without them, the Red Army would have fallen. And I hope one day the truth will be known." That truth, hidden for years, was the lesson he left behind. Not a tale of weakness, but a memory of how plenty, more than fear or pride, had kept him alive. And in that memory lay the message for all who came after. Sometimes the greatest weapon is not the gun in the hand, but the food in the stomach and the boots on the feet.